Morning, everyone, or good afternoon. We are about to start, and I would like to introduce to you Dr. Jeral Kirwan. He will provide our opening remarks.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Welcome, everyone, to Grant Writing 101, Chasing the Mission. The slide's going a little slow, so. Here's a wonderful picture of our great presenters that you'll be able to see soon. So we're going to have 4 sessions and a wrap up, and I'm not going to go through each session, but each session is designed to address a certain aspect of the budget or the grant writing process. The first session will be welcoming you all and getting started on the research process, grant writing process. So why do I care about grant writing? I'm not going to write any grants, right? Well, as a nonprofit university, we're going to have an opportunity to make partnerships with other folks, do grants of our own and things like that. One thing that we're looking to do is find ways to offer students and faculty opportunities, and this is just another step in that. What has grant writing done for me lately? Well, you might be surprised that a lot of funding behind the scenes was gathered with a grant of some sort or another. Do I need a research grant to do research? Do I need a grant to do research? No, but it sure does help. Having money to fund your research that you don't have to pull out of your pocket or from a college budget is a pretty good thing. So we'll get into that later. All right, do I need a grant to do research? The reality is most folks in academic world and professional practice never actually go for a federal state grant, but it's likely that you might get a small one. Many graduate students, for example, I did as a doctoral student, I received a grant to go to conferences, $500 little grant from the college. And so you might be surprised at the scope and nature of grants and the things that you'll be able to fund with them. So some of the things to consider, again, I'm not going to go through this whole thing because that's what our whole set of presentations will cover, but we're going to look at the problem. We're going to determine, what is your need? What do you need the grant to do? Your goals and objectives, all the activities necessary, and you might be surprised at some of them. They're not all intuitive. And then you're going to outline a process, and these are some of the basic steps or deliverables in a grant. So here's some tips, and I'm not going to go through these again fully here because these will come up again in each session, but the grant writing takes practice and it takes a team. It's very difficult for a single person to create and write a grant, little or small. And so learning the process, learning how organizations do things, what their needs are, how your needs match to their needs, that's some of our goals in these workshops. So for example, one thing that people don't know is when you write the grant, you don't just write a grant of something that's interested you and then you go out and try to sell it to people. You want to look for places that are doing similar things that you're doing, that have similar mission statements, similar needs. And so one thing you can do is the person leading that grant, federal, state, foundational, or even small grants, and say, hey, here's my idea. Is it worthwhile to you for me to submit a proposal before you actually do any work? So that's the kind of thing we're going to hit on this. Researching the grant process, we're going to look at what RFPs are, requests for proposals. We're going to look at different types of funding, different size grants from $50 to $5 million. Where to look for these things and some strategies for finding grants that match what you want to do. All right. I'm going to switch to another slide. One moment, please. All right. Dr. Hardy, would you like to introduce can you see that slide yet? I'm not sure if it's coming up.
No, we don't see it yet. However, I'm going to go. I'm going to say, Welcome everyone from those who are near and far, those on the East Coast. Good afternoon. We are so excited to be here. And let me tell you why. We are the grant writing team. And so today I would love to introduce to you two people that are going to actually conduct this session. We have Olivia Pollard, who is a Ph.D. candidate who will actually finish her Ph.D. in October, and we have Dr. Paul Greenberg. And between the both of these two individuals, let me tell you just a teeny bit about them before we get started. Collectively, they have 11 years of experience in writing grants. And collectively as the team, we have 76 years of experience in writing grants. And so this team is equipped with a lot of information, and we're just grateful to be here. And I am getting ready to turn it over to the presenters. But one thing I want to say to you is that grant writing is not easy, and the most difficult part is what you're going to see today, is the research part. So I am going to now turn it over to the presenters. We're excited, and we're just looking forward to your presentation today. Thank you.
Can you see the slides yet?
We see the slides, and they're not in slideshow mode.
All right, let me try again. Wait, just a moment. Sorry.
And I want to ask you all, thank you for your patience. We are remotely doing and conducting things, and we will have this shortly up and for you, and be formulating your questions, what you think you may want to ask, or things you've never been sure about. And if it will not be answered in this session, it will be answered later. But we want to make sure that we definitely get your questions. And so I am going to now turn it over to the presenters.
Okay. All right, everyone. I've mellowed out with some smooth jazz and amped up with a cup of coffee. So let's jump right in. Jeral, you ready?
Yeah, do you see it? You see the slides?
I do.
All right.
Is that the one that I just sent you? I don't know if it is.
This is the one that you just sent me.
Okay. Looks weird. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first session of Grant Writing 101. I'm Olivia Pollard, and along with my colleague Paul Greenberg, we've created what I hope you'll find to be an entertaining and informative introduction into grant writing. In this session, we will cover researching the grant process. We will touch on where to look for grants, what to work on, the different types of grants that are available, grant sources, some of the search strategies you can use to obtain them, and avoiding scams. Some of the information you may know and some you may not. Like a little known fact about grant writing is over $50 billion are awarded by foundations to charitable organizations every year. This was cited in the article titled Essential Grant Writing Tips for Your Nonprofit on the modernnonprofit.com website. Or the law requires the information about entities and organizations receiving federal funds to be disclosed to the public via a central website, which is usaspending.gov. Sorry about that. This information is published by the grant-making agency and includes the entity's name, amount of the grant, and funding agency and location. We will provide this source and a list of many other resources that we'll talk about in a handout at the end of our presentation. This resource will include every link in every part of our presentation, so you don't need to worry about writing them down. First, I would like to start with a simple little poll. Are we ready with the poll?
Yeah, I don't know how to do a poll.
Okay.
I can launch the poll. You want the first one?
Yes. Has anyone here received the grant? And you can just click in yes or no. Oh, it says I can't vote. Okay, I can't control the poll, so if we're
I can remove the poll.
okay. Wow. Okay, so 32% have received a grant and 68% have not. So we're looking to change that. After all 4 sessions, you guys are going to be experts in grant writing, hopefully. And those numbers will hopefully change, and you'll go out there and you'll seek more grants. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay. There are many organizations and/or entities where you could acquire a grant. The 2 types that are most commonly known are public sector and private sector. A simple way to think about this is that grants from the public sector come from different levels of government, whereas grants from the private sector can come from businesses, corporations, foundations, or other non-governmental organizations. In each sector, you can encounter different types of grants. For example, the public sector is the part of the U.S. economy that provide various governmental services. These agencies are owned and operated by the U.S. government, and one of their roles is to provide government grants to both internal and external entities. A variety of organizations can apply for these grants, but the most important idea to remember is that these grants can come from federal, state, or local government organizations. Some examples of these granting organizations would be, for federal, NSF, National Science Foundation. The National Science Foundation is an independent federal agency created to promote the progress of science to advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, and to secure the national defense. You can read more about them on their website, and their website is www.nsf.gov. The NSF annually funds approximately 20% of basic federally supported college and university research. As I go through a couple of them, I'm not going to go into the websites because that's going to be on the handout, and you guys can check them out whenever you get a chance. The second one would be NIH, National Institutes of Health. They're a medical research agency, and they're making important discoveries that improve health and save lives. Did you know that NIH is the largest public funder of biomedical research in the world, investing more than $32 billion a year to enhance life and reduce illness and disability? NIH-funded research has led to breakthroughs and new treatments helping people live longer, healthier lives, and build research foundations that drive discovery. The next one would be U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, of which NIH is a part of. We are all familiar with that agency being a College of Health. And the next one being that we're educational. The Department of Health and Human Services is the federal government's principal agency for protecting the health of all Americans and providing essential human services, especially to those who are least able to help themselves. The U.S. Department of Education ensures equal access to education and promotes educational excellence throughout coordination, management, and accountability in federal education programs. Now, moving on to state. I used to apply annually for a state grant for an organization I used to work for, which was NYCHHC, better known as New York City Health and Hospitals Corp. You might have seen them in the news. They're very popular in New York. The title of the grant was New York State Archives Local Government Records Management Improvement Fund. That's a mouthful, better known as LGRMIF. And it was for our document imaging department. This allowed us to hire employees to complete the scanning jobs as well as purchase equipment and software for the department. The grant started off very large, over $5 million, and decreased every year. The last grant we applied for, we won the highest amount awarded at the time, which was $125,000. So keep in mind, if you plan to apply for grants to sustain a project or establish a project, the grant reward may not stay the same. Some examples of state grants would be, since my hometown was New York, I took two of those. One would be grants to New York community-based organizations to mitigate environmental harms and risks. Another would be contract for services to a New York nonprofit for support services to elderly people transitioning to community living. And let's take California, for example. Grants to California 4-H and FFA programs for agricultural-based projects in Imperial County, and grants to California nonprofit schools and agencies for community improvement in eligible counties. Both grants can be looked at as local grants because they are not only specific to the state, but certain counties as well. So now we're going to move into some local grants. The final level of public sector or government grants are local government grants, which are state-funded grants that can go to entities at the city, county, township, or school level. Some examples of that would be, for New York City, a mayor's fund to advance New York City, or New York State HSC tuition state program. This grant can also be considered for the city and the state, and is often used for the city and state colleges. And let's take San Diego. One of their grants would be American Association of University Women San Diego Scholarships, and then the San Diego Foundation, where if you visit their website, which is on the handout, you'll see a whole host of grants for San Diego residents. Okay, so we can pull up the second poll, which is, how many of you can name a granting organization that can be found in your state or local region? Okay, so we can take the poll down now. Let's see what our numbers look like. Well, that's not too bad. 38% can and 62% cannot. It's not too bad, but we're looking to change that. Okay, so in the private sector, you can apply for corporate, nonprofit, and religious grants, to name a few. Some examples of this would be, and I think I have 4 or 5 on the list. I'm not going to go through every single one in essence of time. Okay, so one would be 3M. 3M focuses their corporate grants in areas of education, community, and environment. Bank of America provides nonprofit grants and event sponsorships with a focus on jobs, workforce development, housing, community development, and hunger, basic human services. Coca-Cola focuses on 3 areas: women, water, and recycling. No, well-being, I'm sorry. And in 2016, the Washington Post reported how Walmart, Coca-Cola, Nestle, and Pepsi-Cola donated millions of water bottles to help out with the Flint, Michigan water crisis. If you'd like to read more on this article, the link can be found on the resource page. Family Dollar, everyone should be familiar with Family Dollar. They're a corporate giving program, and they focus exclusively upon programs whose purpose is to provide the basic necessities of life to low-income and low-middle-income families, primarily in neighborhoods where their stores are located. Jeral, we switched out of the slides.
I don't know what's doing. You don't see the slide?
Now I see it.
That's weird.
Okay, so the next one would be Intel. The Intel Foundation provides strategic grant support to initiatives that advance science, technology, engineering, and math, which is the STEM education, in communities where the company has significant presence. And then the last one would be Wells Fargo. Then they provide community donations to nonprofits and schools, environmental initiatives, and other corporate citizenship initiatives. There'll be a little more. I think there may be at least 10 more corporations on the resource handout. So look out for that. This was to name a few. So once we're done, you can get searching. We're going to discuss how to search for grants and who is eligible for grants as the final part of our introduction. But before we get into search, there is more to know about the grant types. This will help narrow your search and give you some insight into where money comes from and where it goes. Here to present this information is my colleague, Dr. Greenberg. Take it away, Paul.
Hello, everybody, and thanks so much, Olivia.
You're welcome.
It's really good to be here. Can we go also to the next slide when we have a chance? Sweet, thank you very much. Now that Olivia has given you a nice overview of some of the total amounts of grant funding available, some of the typical funding sources, such as U.S. government and private organizations, plus some of the specific organizations and websites that'll list grants, I'd like to mention a little bit more about the types of grants, some of my experience with grants, and set the stage for discussing some of our search methods, which is the final part before application. One of the useful parts here is that while we're going to share some personal stories, the majority of this information that we're going to cover here is hosted online and is going to be listed in our grant supplement. So you'll be able to look up a lot of this information on your own. Just as a brief review, what really is a grant? A grant is your source of, or not yours, but it's a source of money provided by one or more organizations to achieve a range of objectives. Jeral alluded to this earlier, that one of the ways to seek a grant is to try to come up with one of your own ideas and shop around for people who would like to purchase that via grant funding. Or you can look to see what the organizations need done and try to align what you want to do with what they want to be done. There's pros and cons to either of these, and some maybe, typically it's easier to align yourself with what the organization wants. But to give some perspective on what the grants actually are, what I like to do is just take a look at that infographic. And from the infographic, we can see that there's 4 large sources of money, including federal, state, and local government, business, and philanthropy. The size of those clouds give you some idea of which sources have the most total money, but this says nothing about the amount of individual award provided by any specific grant from those groups. So they can be small, in the hundreds to the thousands, to much, much larger than that. All right. In addition to these 4 sources of funding, we have different groups who can apply for the funding. The typical recipients for these are not-for-profit organizations, which has implications for our schools switching to not-for-profit status. Businesses can apply, government agencies themselves can apply, and so can educational organizations. It's not a complete list, and even leaves out what might be interest to some people here, that individuals can apply for some grants. The specific information about who can apply for a grant is listed in that grant's eligibility criteria. And we might have, if we have time in the presentation, we'll actually look at an example of one of those. Another piece of information the sources of grants leave out is an indication of the competitiveness or the work or skills required to get grants. A lot of people want this money, and so there's often stiff competition, especially for the first type of government funding, which is called discretionary or competitive funding. What this means for us is that a grant seeker is going to need to put your best foot forward, but also, I keep in mind to maintain your motivation even if you get rejections. Rejections are going to be the most common thing, most common outcome of a grant application. So just gaining experience, writing the grants, sending them in, getting feedback, that's highly valuable. So it's really good to look at the grant funding process as a long-term goal, not a specific, I must get this one grant now, or it's the end of it. If you take a long-term view, you can build your skills and increase your chances of obtaining these grants. Okay. My own experience getting grants is mostly related to working on NIH-funded grants for neuroscience laboratories. The way these got funded was to have senior researchers with a good track record of publication head up the efforts, and sometimes propose joint work with other researchers. What this means for you is that you might consider applying for grants as a team or with other people instead of just on your own, even though you may be eligible to apply on your own. Let's see, what do I want to say? Given the level of competition for the grants, yeah, here's my plug for something you can do in your classes right now that'll help with grant writing. I like to use grant writing as an example of why it's important to improve your writing as much as possible and as often as possible. You never know when you really might want to apply for a grant, but the grant writing time is not when you want to worry about the writing skills. So if you can, as much as you can do to work on your writing skills in classes right now is something that's going to be great to get these, to prepare yourself for writing a grant. Given the nature of how competitive the grants are, even grammatical errors will be criteria that funding agencies might use to choose somebody else's grant. All right. So now that now we've seen a little bit of some of these basic ideas about grants, I think for overall perspective, I want to mention the 4 major types of grants that we can look at. The first is discretionary and competitive grants, and these are the ones that perhaps the majority of us will be applying to. For these competitive funding, you obtain this funding by competing through different funding agencies, and the agencies award those grants based on how attractive that funding panel views your project and in comparison to other projects. The second type of grant is called formula funding, and this is a mandatory grant, legislatively determined, that says that a certain amount of money must go to certain types of work. While I doubt the majority of us will be working under formula funding, it's still possible, and it's good to know about these grants because smaller organizations may use some of this funding to fund grants that you could apply for. A third category of these grants is called continuation funding, and this is essentially the lifeblood of any research laboratory. Once you get an initial grant, that's your startup, that's a big win, and if you can use the success that you have based on the outcome or the output of your first grant to apply for continuation funding, this is how you turn a single grant into either a long-lasting project or a career. So a lot of academics base their career on continuation funding. Programs, many community programs are completely dependent on continuation funding. So it's just good to know about this because when you write a grant, you can look at it as a one-off grant, maybe it's a travel grant or you get to present at a conference, or you can look at it as you're really applying, you'd like to get a sequence of grants to fund a long-term project, perhaps a research project or in your community. So it's just good to know about these. So a fourth one is called pass-through funding. And this is just another source of funding that can be, that federal and state governments can use for either competitive funding or formula funding. And the reason I wanted to mention all these is that it tells us that we can search for both federal and state websites for grant announcements and opportunities. But while you're looking at these opportunities, it's good to keep an eye on what type of funding that it is. A fifth type of the funding that we have is ones that's specifically related to student aid, such as the Pell Grant, which can provide about $6,000 a year and are based on financial need. However, I'm going to leave it to our Office of Financial Aid to explain other options about student financial aid. So that covers one chunk of funding, which is government funding. And then our next category of funding is private funding. And the 2 types of grants that we're going to see with private funding are those that provide general purpose support for your program. That's called the operating support. And then a second type is program or project specific support. The reason I wanted to mention those is when you have general purpose support, that gives you a lot of flexibility and it shows that the organization has a lot of faith in what you're doing. If you have only project support or specific program support, that funding tells you exactly what can be, how much can be spent and exactly on what. So if you do a good job at your project and program support, it may be possible to work your way up towards getting more general purpose support. Okay, so could we go on to the next slide? Now would also be a good time to, if you have any questions about the grant process or what we've said so far, put them in the chat for us, and we'll start collecting these at the end. We'll save some time for question and answer. With this next idea, what I wanted to mention is that if you go to Ashford, www.ashford.edu, tuition, financial aid, payments, options, scholarships, and grants, if you go to that website or you Google search for ashford.edu, tuition and financial aid, you can see a variety of different options that Ashford offers us. We also recently received an email about University of the Rockies completion a grant. So if you haven't yet seen that email and that applies to you, that's worth looking for. So I just wanted to mention that Ashford itself offers a variety of different grants. Okay, next slide if you would please, Jeral. All right, so what we have now is understanding the different sources of money and the different types of grants generally. Now we would like to start looking at grant search strategy. So with grant search strategy, there's basically two. You can try to fund your own specific idea, or you can look for the existing requests for proposals. We highly recommend working on the second one, looking for existing requests for proposals. Not only will that more quickly align with what funding organizations want, but it should also be easier to find those grants. If you're just shopping around for a place to sell your own idea for a project that you want funded, it may not be clear where that fits. Whereas if you look for existing requests for proposals, those come from specific agencies and they have many detailed criteria about who can apply and where to actually do that. So when we start looking for grants, typically people will look on government websites. So we've got grants.gov, and we've got a search engine called Grants Forward. In addition to those government websites that we can look on, there's just a large number and an ever-changing number of foundation websites, corporate websites, and private websites that will all offer a surprising range of funding opportunities. Professional society websites will also have this. For your search strategy, this should be familiar to many online students. You know, what do we do? Or familiar to a lot of people, period. What do we do to search for this information? Most people will typically begin with a Google search, and that's fine. You can look for your specific ideas. You can type in the word grants. That's also where it gets a little bit dangerous because, and Olivia will touch on this when we talk about scams. There's a lot of different scams that target people who are searching for grants. So when you do a general internet search, you're going to have to pay attention to what's real and what is fake, which makes the second search strategy, looking at a grant search engine such as grants.gov, makes that much safer because that brings you directly to government grants with actual eligibility criteria. So once you know where to start searching for the grants, either general internet search or specific grant search engines like grants.gov, then we begin to work on your keywords and the delimiters. So your keywords are going to determine if you find a grant, and then the delimiters are basically going to make that grant search more efficient. Again, if you have questions at this point, please add them into the chat box. And let's see. I think, Olivia, would you like to start off with your tips for grant search from here?
Sure, Paul. I'll take over.
All right.
Okay. That's right, Paul. Google. because if Google said it, then it must be right. It must be true, right? When using a search engine like Google or Bing or Yahoo, any type of search engine, you can input search terms such as scholarships, fellowships, RFPs for your specific criteria. An RFP is a request for a proposal, or grants for your specific criteria. You can also look to your state and or local government websites, the school you work for or attend. I recently applied to and won a grant at the school I'm attending, so it is possible to achieve. Professional society, as Paul mentioned earlier. Networking is a very good way of getting into the grant writing arena and seeing what's out there. Corporate websites like Apple, Amazon, Google, Walmart, Target, etc. You'll see a whole lot of them. They're ready to give away their money, so you can take it, apply for it. Matthew Lesko's website, his name is old, but he is still kicking, and his website is kept up to date. And he's at www.lesko.com, and that's going to be on the handout. Social media. A lot of people may not know, by following specific foundations aligned with your interests and check for announcements regularly, you can find a grant that you can apply for. The NIH grant website, they always post announcements about grants that are available to apply for. There are also websites that host grant databases. Some you'll have to pay a fee for, and to access the information, and some are for free. So here are a few. The Foundation Center, the Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance, grants.gov, which Paul mentioned a little while ago, GuideStar. GuideStar provides information on all kinds of nonprofits, including foundations. You can register for free and use the advanced search capabilities to find the 990 PFs of foundations. The Form 990 PF, titled Return of Private Foundation, is essentially a tax return that must be filed each year with the Internal Revenue Service by organizations exempt from federal income taxes under Section 501 of the IRS Code, and whose annual receipts are normally more than $25,000 a year. It's been said in the grant writing industry that if you know you're a grant writer, whenever you're able to read a 990 form and understand it, that's a little grant writing humor. The next database would be the Grantsmanship Center. There's a map on the US where clicking on a state brings up links to top grant-making foundations, community foundations, corporate giving programs, and the state website homepage. The Community Foundation Locator is sponsored by the Council Foundation, and their website displays a map of the US as well. And it also lists its local community foundations and links to those foundation sites. The Chronicle of Philanthropy is an excellent source of news on the foundation and nonprofit world, and there is a grant database there. You do have to subscribe, however, the access to the database, there are a limited number of articles for free, okay? Big Online is a for-profit resource that provides online and telephone assistance for navigating the various tools on their websites. And they also offer online classes to learn more about the features of its extensive database, which contains the 990s of many funders. Don't underestimate how much great information you can find in a tax return, okay? Grant Station. This allows grant seekers to identify potential funding sources for their programs or projects and mentors them through the process. Instrumental is one last one. They put nonprofit grant search on autopilot. Nonprofits provide basic information about their programs and projects, and Instrumental matches them with relevant funding opportunities and helps to manage their process. It's a paid subscription, but they promise to save you dozens of hours and thousands of dollars that you might otherwise spend tracking down the best leads on your own. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, scams, avoiding scams. Oh yes, there are scams everywhere, even here. Individuals preying on people looking to fund projects, causes, organizations are prime targets. Here are a few ways to avoid them. Be leery of anyone reaching out to you, specifically of eligibility news. More than likely, this is a scam. The government and other grantors will not seek you out to offer you a grant. You must seek them out and apply. If you are asked to send money to get the grant, it's a scam. You should not have to pay money to get money, or else why would you need the grant? The grant does not require an application or way for you to apply. False. All grants will require an application. These applications are kept on file and used to determine the winner of the grant. If you never submit an application, they don't know what you want, and they don't even know who you are. Okay, and the last one would be, you have mysteriously won a grant that you did not apply for, or that you can spend without reporting. There are no grant drawings you can win out of the blue. You must apply yourself because there is information you would have to provide when doing so. When you apply for the grant, the grantor will have strict stipulations on how the grant should be used. Okay, so we will provide 4 websites in the handout you can visit to read more about avoiding grant scams, such as how to avoid grant scams on Health and Human Services website, NIH's Grant Scams podcast, and grants.gov, where they have a plethora of information for you on the grant writing process and how to report scams that you might have been contacted by. Okay, so I think we're on to the next slide. This should be our last slide. Okay. All right. So for this slide, I guess we're going to conclude. Paul and I had a wonderful time working on this session for you all, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Please send us any questions or put questions in the chat. Any feedback and links to all the resources in the presentation can be found on the PDF file that we're going to send out or attach. Thank you for attending. And now if there's any questions, if we have time, if you have questions for Paul only, no, I'm just kidding. You can ask us both questions. If you have questions now, ask them. If there are no questions, then Paul has a search demo he'd like to show, time permitting. So take it away, Paul. Let's see. First, are there any questions?
Olivia, this is Nina. There's a question in the chat. Do you want to discuss matching funds?
Matching funds? I don't want to discuss that. I think that might be covered in one of our future sessions.
Okay.
What's the question about matching funds?
It just says, do you want to discuss matching funds?
Oh, I think, yeah, that'd probably be best for a future session.
Okay. That's the only question I see currently in the chat.
Let me ask a question of the audience. Does the audience feel like applying for a grant is daunting and out of reach, or it's something that you can do? I'll give everybody a few seconds to cogitate on that.
Comments are coming through saying, yes, it's doable, but it is still daunting, intimidating.
I feel that way too. The grants that I worked on were huge. It took multiple career researchers quite a long time to put those together. They got the money, but I'm like, wow, it's tough to do on your own. But then I compared that to what a 20-year-old friend of mine said when we were all about 20. She's like, oh, I'm good at writing grants. I get them pretty easily. I just looked at her, I thought, what grants and how much? She's like, oh, I got $10,000 to do an educational program with Native Americans on their reservation. It's like part of an outdoor education program. She just quickly wrote the grant, got 10 grand, and, it explained it like it was nothing to her. So on the one hand, some grants are difficult to get, and other grants, I think, are quite within reach of people with perhaps even no formal training on it. I don't know. Her parents they did work for the government, the Forest Service, so it's possible they gave her some information. about how to, about proper documentation, but she's just liked to write grants and was successful getting them before. And this was while she was in college. So she hadn't even graduated yet. So I would just like to put it out there that, if, when in doubt, if you want to put the time into the grant application, do it. You would never, it's an opportunity that you would not have unless you actually did it.
There's another question that came through. Lynn asks, does it depend on the grant organizations, or do some require more detail than others?
I would absolutely say that some require more detail than others.
For sure.
Olivia, did you want to talk to that?
No, I was just saying for sure, because when I applied for grants such as the city and state grant for the organization that I was working for, they required 10 copies of each application with accompanying paperwork. And I think the whole packet for each 10 packets would be 20 pages apiece. Whereas when I applied for the grant on my own, it was maybe 5 pages long, and I only had to provide 1 copy. They did ask for a lot of information, both of them. I'm not going to lie. You will be writing and typing and researching, and you will have to provide a lot of information, but it's well worth it to see it when you definitely win that grant, because you guys are going to win a grant. So that's all I wanted to add, Paul.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Just considering what we've said already today, from the largest government grants down to the smallest community grants, even down to grants that individual people want to put out there in memorial to their friends, family, or loved ones. Those will take on a wide variety of different level of detail in the application. Some may be only a few pages, others the 10 copies is outrageous. But so there's many I would say that there's probably a grant to fit every type of person, from the very smallest grants that require the least documentation to the largest ones where you're going to need some help with that, most likely. But the grants really are feasible. We have over 30% of the people here on just this conference call who've gotten some sort of a grant. I got a grant at the University of Arizona. It was a neuroscience training grant. And those were given out to people based on their interests and their promise. So we had 5 of those go to the incoming class. I got one of them. And so I think I had to, I'm not even sure, it was so long ago, I'm not sure I had to apply for it. My advisor may have applied for it, but grants are within reach. Many people get these, and there's such a wide variety that if you're interested in funding, looking for funding for your projects or to work with other organizations, it's a whole ecosystem to start getting in touch with. What's out there? Most people, I would say most people don't even know what's out there. I don't know many of the grants are out there, but there's so many, from the Bill Gates Foundation all the way down to, your neighbor. Somebody's neighbor out there could be the source of a grant if they have a small business or if they have their own nonprofit organization. So just you never know what you'll find unless you actually do the looking.
Paul, while we have a few minutes, do you want to do the live search demo so you can show them what it looks like?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and do that. This is a live search, so I don't know what we're gonna find. We'll also start off with one of the more detailed ones. So I'll just go ahead and look at the government grants on the government webpage, and I'll start. I want to switch to my screen sharing. I'm going to try it. Okay, so the fastest way that people are going to get to grants is probably your internet search engine. So I just Googled for government grant search, and it brings you to home, grants.gov. Open this up in a new tab. Brings you to their lovely Facebook look-alike, grants.gov, nice blue website. And it gives you a couple search options. You can just search directly from the search bar, which is nice. Or you can click the search grants button. I'll just go ahead and do that. Hopefully there's not much of a delay here. Is everybody seeing the screen?
Yes, it's there, Paul.
Okay, thanks, Olivia.
You're welcome.
So all search, as you can see, is going to begin with a keyword, or if you're savvy, maybe you have an opportunity number. So let's just see what comes up with educational, because we're all interested in education in some way. It also allows you to have some delimiters. Forecasted grants are posted, so I'm just going to limit it to posted. That cuts down what we have. And then what you see is just a list of the post of each opportunity. And probably what we'll look for is the opportunity title. Excuse me. USAID, see, forest health. Sounds interesting to me. I don't know if that's interesting to you. But my friend who is adept at getting the grants from local agencies for community and education, parents work with the Forest Service. So another thing to look is, when's the closing date? Yeah, August 10th. So most likely we're not going to be able to apply for that this year, but just for instructional purposes, let's take a look at it. So now what this brings you into is the detailed more of the detailed information for the grant. And here's where you would actually start learning how the government describes these grants. So, excuse me, for first-time grant searchers, it's going to be important just to look through each of these different fields. What are these? It's discretionary funding, so that's the first type. The competitive discretionary funding is the first type of funding that we discussed. So now you know that you're going to have to compete with others for this, and hopefully it'll be based on merit. But a lot of grants are based on what's the hot topic of the moment. You really have to appeal to people's interests. It's not just if your idea is good, it's if your idea is good and timely and has the backing, or if there's enough interest in it. From this, probably the next thing that we're most interested in is eligibility criteria. So it says that you're going to have to look for extra information. And this announcement is not a request for applications. It's to provide public notice of the Park Service's intention to award financial assistance on the next project activities. So if we're looking for something that we want to apply to directly, this would not be it. So you now see that it's going to take some work to sort through what grant opportunities exist. I want to pause here for a second. Do we have any questions about the grant search at this point?
Paul, this is Jeral. I can add to that. Public notice always comes out a few months before the RFP. They always do that to give people plenty of time to start looking and searching. And then the official RFP will come out probably 3 to 6 months after that notice.
And Jeral, let me quiz you on this because this is fun. So when did you find out that that's how the grant process works?
When I took a grant writing class in graduate school.
Okay, so when you took a grant writing class in graduate school. And are these something that we're going to be covering in future sessions?
Yes.
Fantastic. So now everybody, you see why it's important to show up for the next sessions? There's too much information to get through here. But that information is critical. It helps you interpret what it is that you're seeing.
Paul, we have 6 minutes. Do you want to go to another website really quickly?
Well, we need to sum up too, so I'm going to be cognizant of people's time.
Oh,
yeah, I think this is good.
These are things we're going to cover in future sessions, so thank you very much.
Yeah, just one quick search, and then let's go back to you, Jeral, or?
Yeah, I'll take it. Thank you, Olivia and Paul, very much for this. This is some good information. There's a couple of questions I wanted to hit on there real quickly. How long do postings stay open? As long as they have money, sometimes 2 or 3 years. It just depends on the grant, who's giving out the grant. Let's see. Go to OR grant, find the grant and conductor. So that's a great question. So if you're not affiliated with the organization, typically you would do the search that Paul just did. and you would find, I like to find those postings before the RFP, because once the RFP is out, you've got some competitors. With the posting, nobody's competing against you yet. And so what I would do is I'd click at the bottom of that page, and there's a person's name there, a contact person, usually the grant administrator. And I would contact them and say, here's my idea. Do you think this is a good idea? And they'll say yes or no. They're usually pretty candid about it. And then you proceed from there. And it gets your name out there. Anyway, some of these strategies we'll cover later. I want to say that our next session, we're going to start talking about, Drs. Hardy and Harper are going to talk about needs assessment, goals and objectives, and some of these methods for these activities. I can also say that from personal experience, I recently had a $500 grant. It was a teaching and learning grant, and it took me 2 paragraphs and a few minutes to send. And I've also worked a multi-million-dollar grant for the Department of Energy through NSF, and that took 9 months to write the grant, a team of 10 scientists and Ph.D. folks, and it was 213 pages. I can even send you a copy of it if you want. Most people don't share their grant proposals because it's competitive, and we often use the same stuff more than once. But this is a grant I would never go for again, so I'm happy to share it. But it took 9 months to write the grant, so interesting stuff. And yeah, so to hit on Catherine's question, we are looking in the future to get small grants, medium-sized grants, maybe large grants, partner with other universities. The field is open. One of my goals is that there are people out in the world doing research, and now that we're going to be nonprofit, I can say, can I be a part of your research? Even if I don't submit my own grant, I can collaborate with folks in other universities and institutions. So there's a lot of things coming up, and a lot of our future sessions will touch on that. Any last questions before we?
Yeah, Jeral, there's a whole bunch in the chat now. One specifically for Paul. How long do those postings stay open?
I already answered it. Up to 2 to 3 years.
Okay. And then Catherine asks, if we are not currently affiliated with an organization, would it be helpful to find an organization and then go for a grant? Or
Yeah,
find
that's
a
what I was
grant
just hitting
and then
on, too.
contact the organization?
Yeah, that's what I was just hitting on. We can do
my
some
apologies.
collaborative stuff. Yeah.
I didn't know you were monitoring the chat too. My apologies.
I'm reading yeah. I thought I missed some, so that's good. Two eyes are better than one, or 4 eyes, or whatever it is.
Yeah, 4 eyes.
What are some of the potential reasons we want to pursue grants? Money. But it's not just money. It's, we want to fund. So, for example, I might want to get a grant to fund my research, or I might want to start working on a diversity project with Dr. Hardy, where we find first-generation students who don't typically pursue college, and we write them grants. So we could get a grant to give grants. I mean, there's so many things that grants can do, but it's all about money. Money, LaTanya, exactly. Money is opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to do things. It's also an opportunity for us to provide others things. And that's what those corporate partnerships that Paul touched on are about, is that we get money from corporations, or we get assistance or connections to organizations, and we help students. And so what is our ultimate goal here? To advance our fields, to help students, and to provide those, LaTanya's great point, opportunities.
I want to add one more word here, and that word is community. So if you search for community grants, you'll start to see just how much stuff is actually going on in your community, who's organizing it, and what gets funded. So you can do, it doesn't have to be educational, it can just be community building in a variety of really interesting ways. So I would search for that if you're curious about what you can do with grant money.
Yeah, and there are so many opportunities out there. I mean, just search for your local nonprofit organization. Usually there's a local chapter or some sort of social connection, and search for nonprofits in your area. I work for, occasionally do some volunteer work for the Denver Nonprofit Association, who they have over 150 member companies and organizations, and they write thousands of grants each year. And actually I wrote their grant writing handbook, which I can also send you.
Hi, Jeral. This is Pamela. I just want to add one more thing before we let everyone go. We have approximately, we're over time. I want to say this. What we are showing you today and we want to thank Olivia and Paul for their time. But what we want to say to you today, this is a basic grant writing course. You may be able to go out and do something with this, hone your skills, but we want to give you the basics. So many people will go away and be able to do something with this. Well, we just want you to say this is a start to get your foot in the door. So from everybody here, we just want to thank you for your time. Thank you, Paul and Olivia. You did a fantastic job. Nina, thank you for monitoring the chat. Jeral, any last words? Then we will let you go.
You said it so eloquently, I can't add to that.
It's so fun. Well, we thank you. We are looking forward to seeing everyone on August the 14th. Just thank you, everyone. Any other questions, please put them in the chat and we will ensure that you get your response back. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.